I'm Emily. Welcome to Scars and Stories. If you like storytime vibes, hit subscribe and let's dive in together.
Tonight, I'm bringing you a story that begins not with a fight, not with accusations, but with a whisper. A whisper so quiet that at first, it almost didn't seem dangerous at all. But sometimes betrayal doesn't storm into your life. It slips in like smoke, soft, unseen, until it's too late to breathe. Eleanor leaned in close to her fiancé, her lips just an inch from his ear, her voice soft enough to sound intimate. She whispered, "I still text Sebastian before bed sometimes." Sebastian, her ex-boyfriend. The man she had sworn was nothing more than a memory. At first, the words didn't even sting like an insult. They cut deeper. They lingered. They twisted into his mind like a blade and stayed there. He didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He didn't demand her phone or accuse her of lying. He just nodded as though she had mentioned the weather. Eleanor smiled faintly, as if his calm meant permission. Then she rolled over, pulled the blanket around her, and drifted into sleep. But he did not sleep. He stared at the ceiling, replaying her words again and again. That was the moment everything shifted. He wasn't a man to blow up in rage. He wasn't the type to scream and throw things. No, he believed in silence. He believed in patience. He believed in evidence. Because loud men lose everything. Quiet men gather what matters. The next morning, Eleanor hummed while she made coffee. She kissed his cheek before leaving for work, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't shattered something in the dark the night before. And that, in itself, told him everything. If she believed her confession was harmless, then she had been doing it long enough for it to feel normal, which meant there had to be proof. Her weakness was her nightly showers. She liked them long, hot, and filled with music. That evening, when she disappeared into the bathroom, leaving her phone glowing on the dresser, he felt his pulse hammer like he was about to crack open a bank vault. The phone was locked. A passcode. He almost gave up. Almost. But Eleanor was sentimental, arrogant even. She believed he wasn't paying attention to the details. She always used important dates, anniversaries, milestones, little moments she thought mattered only to her. He tried the date of their engagement. Wrong. He tried the date they first moved in together. Still wrong. Then he remembered something she had once said about her high school graduation, how it was her first taste of freedom. He entered that date. The phone unlocked. His relief lasted only seconds because what he saw sobered him instantly. Her messages were flooded with one name, Sebastian. He had heard of Sebastian, of course. The ex who was selfish, immature, the one Eleanor had dismissed as a closed chapter. But that chapter wasn't closed. It was still being written every night. He opened the thread, and what he saw made his stomach turn. Every night, almost at the same time, Eleanor sent Sebastian a good-night message, sometimes sweet, sometimes playful, sometimes suggestive, always intimate. He scrolled deeper. She shared details of her day. She spoke about the wedding they were planning. She even mentioned him, her fiancé, like a shadow detail in her real life. Sebastian responded instantly, as if waiting for her message. The rhythm was undeniable. This wasn't just nostalgia. It was a ritual. And then came the line that froze him completely. Eleanor had typed, "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I never left you." Sebastian's reply, "Maybe you wouldn't be texting me from another man's bed." She answered with laughing emojis, brushing it off as a joke. But the implication was clear. The betrayal wasn't just in the secrecy, it was in the intimacy. She had carried another man into their bed every night, but then he noticed something else, something far worse. Sebastian was married to a woman named Grace, a woman who had just given birth. He scrolled faster, heart pounding. Eleanor had congratulated him. She had cooed about the baby while still sending him bedtime confessions. The duplicity was staggering. 2 people, 2 lives, 2 marriages, 1 real, 1 almost, being played with like toys, while Eleanor and Sebastian indulged in nostalgia. His hands shook as he captured screenshot after screenshot. Evidence, proof. When she came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, humming, he sat on the bed pretending to scroll his own phone. She never noticed the shift. She never saw the weapon he now carried quietly in his pocket. The following days were almost unbearable. Eleanor laughed at his jokes, sent him little miss you texts during the day, kissed him goodbye in the mornings. She performed loyalty with the skill of an actress, while betraying him with consistency. But now he saw every crack in the performance. Every smile was a lie. Every quick glance at her phone was a reminder. Every sudden silence when he entered the room was confirmation. He didn't explode, he didn't accuse, he waited, he planned, he gathered more. Because he wasn't interested in honesty anymore, he was interested in control. And control, he realized, came not from shouting, but from timing. One night, as she slept peacefully beside him, he scrolled through the folder of screenshots stored safely in the cloud. Each one was a weapon. Each one was leverage. And he thought of Grace at home with a newborn, rocking her baby to sleep while her husband texted bedtime messages to another woman. Grace deserved to know. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about justice, about truth. He spent nights compiling the evidence into a clean file. Not random screenshots. No, he was meticulous. He organized them by date, highlighted the late-night exchanges, circled the lines that crossed the line from harmless to intimate. By the time he finished, the file was a weapon sharper than any blade. Sending it would destroy his engagement, but pretending nothing was happening would destroy him. So one night, sitting alone in the living room, while Eleanor scrolled her phone in bed, he pressed send. The file went to Grace. The response came faster than he expected. Grace thanked him. She said she had suspected something, but never had proof. Then came her anger. She wanted to know how long it had been going on, if it had ever turned physical. He told her he didn't know for sure, but the pattern spoke volumes. Grace wasn't the kind of woman to sit quietly. Within the hour, Eleanor's phone was buzzing nonstop. Her voice rose from the bedroom, shifting from confusion to panic. He sat in the living room, listening. He didn't interfere. The storm didn't roar in. It built in layers. A chime, then another, then a steadier, more insistent pulse of sound from the bedroom that said Grace wasn't sleeping on it, that she had opened the file and decided silence was the one thing she wouldn't allow anymore. Eleanor's voice rose, wavered, then sharpened, the way glass sings a second before it breaks. She came out barefoot, hair damp, phone clenched like a burning coal. "Did you do something?" Her voice tried to sound calm. It came out thin. Tell me you didn't send." He looked at her without blinking. Nothing in his face offered a bridge. It was enough. She swallowed, eyes bright and desperate, and that small panicked flicker told him what he already knew. There was no misunderstanding to fix. There was only truth walking down the hall. She retreated into the bedroom again, calls and texts firing off in frantic bursts. He didn't follow. He sat with his back straight, hands still, listening to the messy choreography of people who suddenly know they've run out of places to hide. When the phone stopped ringing and the apartment went quiet, it was the heavy kind of quiet that says someone's lost. Then new sounds slipped in, whispered apologies, angry denials, a man's voice muffled by a speaker and thick with fear. Sebastian. She hissed his name like a prayer and a curse. She begged him to handle it. He told her to calm down. Neither of them had a plan that could survive daylight. An hour later, the knock at the door was not polite. It rattled wood and frame and patience. Eleanor flinched. She whispered, "Don't open it." But her feet didn't move. He stood, turned the deadbolt, and pulled the door wide. Sebastian filled the threshold with the red face and sour breath of a man who didn't trust his legs. He pushed inside without waiting, words spilling out in the angry slurry of someone who thinks volume can erase facts. What did you do? You sent my wife. Are you out of your mind? You're trying to ruin me, man. He didn't answer. He studied him the way a surgeon studies a cut he's already decided to make. Sebastian's shirt was wrinkled, his jaw shadowed with neglect. The hand that raked his hair trembled, a restless animal looking for an exit. He wasn't a villain in control. He was a frightened boy who'd made himself king of a paper city and was confused by rain. Eleanor hovered behind him, pleading, palms up. "Sebastian, stop, please, just stop a second." He didn't stop. He lunged closer, too close, spitting accusation, trying to paint betrayal as an unfair play. That was when the fiancé, quiet, deliberate, lifted his phone and tapped the screen. Sound filled the air. A woman's voice, low and soft, intimate enough to belong under blankets. "I still text Sebastian before bed sometimes." Eleanor's whisper breathed from the little speaker, unmistakable. "Not every night." Just some nights, the apartment locked around the words. No one moved. Sebastian's mouth opened and closed without finding a letter. Eleanor lost her breath first. She pressed one hand to her chest and the other to her mouth, eyes huge, caught between apology and outrage, neither useful now. "Tell me," the fiancé said, not raising his voice. Was I supposed to ignore that too? He didn't need an answer. Another knock landed on the door, calm, measured, final. He opened it to find a young woman with a baby carrier looped over one forearm. Grace. Her hair was pinned back with the impatient efficiency of a new mother. Her eyes were clear, wet at the edges, yes, but not wild. She stepped in, set the carrier on the rug, and crossed the room with a steadiness that made the others look small. "You've had a lot of time to talk," she said, looking at Sebastian. "Now you're going to listen." He started with the usual, "This isn't what it looks like," but the excuse died when she raised her phone. She'd built a timeline, timestamps, messages aligned with nights he had worked late, nights he had fallen asleep on the couch, nights she had been up at 2:13 a.m., feeding their newborn while he was typing, not sleepy yet. "Tell me something sweet." Her finger scrolled, tap, 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 like a judge turning pages to the part that matters. "You told me you were too exhausted to talk," she said, quiet slicing through the room like wire. "You told me your head hurt. You told me not to wake you, and you." She turned to Eleanor, voice still calm. "You said congratulations on my daughter at 8:30 and sent my husband good-night hearts at 11:51. "I never meant," Eleanor began, and then stopped. What did she never mean? The words wouldn't come. Meant, Grace echoed. You meant exactly what you typed. I can read. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Even the baby, between sleep and sound, stayed quiet under her shadow. Sebastian tried to step forward. Grace lifted her palm, just that. He froze like she'd pressed it against his chest. If you lie to me now, she said, it will be the last time we speak without lawyers present. He swallowed. His tongue seemed to have forgotten how to move. He looked to Eleanor, not for love, but for a script. Eleanor could offer none. She was staring at the floor, cheeks wet, fingers worrying the edge of her robe like silk could erase ink. The fiancé leaned against the counter, arms folded, saying nothing. He had already said everything he needed when he pressed send. Grace lowered her phone. I asked myself why, she said to both of them. Why do people need this? Why does a man who just became a father need to be someone else's secret? Why does a woman with a ring on her finger need midnight rituals with a man who belongs to another family? I kept looking for a reason that would make me feel less stupid. There isn't one. There's only choice. Silence settled on the room like dust. Then the baby stirred, a small sound like a question. Grace bent, rocked the carrier gently, eyes still on Sebastian. You don't get to visit your daughter tomorrow, she said. You don't get to hold her with hands that were busy pretending to be alone. She looked at the fiancé, and something softer moved behind the steel. Thank you, she said. You didn't owe me the truth. But you gave it to me. Sebastian jolted. Grace, you can't, we can fix. We, she said, and her mouth made the saddest smile the room had ever seen. There hasn't been a we in months. She lifted the carrier with one arm, as easy as a woman carrying a future, and walked to the door. I'll be in touch with your attorney, she added without turning. The latch clicked behind her. The apartment exhaled, then held its breath again. 3 people remained in a little square of carpet, bound by a knot they had tied together and now could not untie. Eleanor dropped onto the couch like her legs had negotiated a surrender without her. Her voice came out small. We need to talk. We're past we, he said. No cruelty. Just the truth, measured and level. I'll email your parents in the morning. Her head snapped up. Please don't involve my parents. I'm not involving them, he said. You did. I'm informing them. She pressed her palms together like a child rehearsing prayer. A long, fragile second passed. Then she whispered, I thought, and the rest of the sentence rustled and went nowhere. Sebastian, abandoned by the woman he'd used and the woman he'd promised to protect, seemed suddenly to remember the door. He stood, looked at it, looked back at them, and then did something he hadn't done all night. He told an unvarnished truth. I didn't think it would get this far, he said. I thought it made me feel, young. You're not young, the fiancé said, still quiet. You're someone's father. Sebastian flinched like the word father had teeth. He looked at the floor, swore under his breath, and left. The door closed. The lock turned. The apartment shrank until the air pressed against their ribs. The fiancé poured a glass of water, set it on the table near Eleanor, and took the chair farthest from her. She stared at the glass without drinking. Do you hate me? She asked. No, he said. Hate takes energy. She winced. A soft, helpless sound escaped her throat, like grief had slipped out without permission. She swallowed it back. I didn't sleep with him, she blurted, a sudden defense, as clumsy as it was late. It was just talk. Talk is the foundation everything else stands on, he said. You built a house on it at midnight and wanted me to be grateful for the shade. She covered her face. Shoulders shook. He didn't comfort her. She felt the absence of his hand like a cold place on skin that had once been warm. He stood. I'll sleep on the couch. You can have the bed. In the morning, we'll sort logistics. He walked past her, paused, and added, check your email. You'll need to call the caterer. She blinked. What? I canceled the venue hold, he said. They'll bill you. We'll divide the deposits according to who signed which, your signatures on most of them. She made a small sound, hurt and disbelief in one breath. You're punishing me. I'm ending a plan that ended itself, he said, and the calm in his voice was the final insult to the chaos in hers. That night on the couch, the ceiling above him looked like a map of a place he'd never visit again. He let the hours move without asking them to go faster. Morning cracked the curtains and dragged the apartment into the real. The real is always uglier than the night before, but it is also simpler. There are fewer shadows to lie in. They divided drawers. They made piles. They labeled boxes with unemotional nouns: books, kitchen, bathroom. He kept his voice even. She tried to be helpful, failed, tried again. At noon, her mother called. The fiancé answered because Eleanor's hands had started shaking again. Her mother's voice came clipped, polite, and much older than it had sounded at the engagement party. What happened? She asked. I've forwarded you everything you need to see, he said. I'm sorry. A pause bloomed and died on the line. So am I, she said, and hung up. By evening, the apartment looked like a hotel room someone had lived in too long. He stacked 3 boxes by the door and slid the 4th aside because old habits die in order. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Grace. He opened it. Thank you again, her message read. I retained counsel today. I won't involve you unless necessary. I'm all right. My daughter is all right. That's what matters. He typed, I'm glad. He erased it. He typed, you didn't deserve any of it. He erased that too. In the end, he sent a simple line. If you need anything, say so. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Some messages do their work in silence. That night, anger finally tried to climb into his chest. Not the loud, exhausting anger that turns men into performers, but the slow, dense kind that makes your hands heavy. He stood at the sink, let cold water run over his wrists, and told himself the truth again. Loud men lose everything. Quiet men gather what matters. He had gathered what mattered: evidence, timing, dignity. And he would not set it down to pick up a weapon he didn't need. The days that followed were a string of small implosions. The vendor emails hit like hail, subject lines that sounded neutral and invoices that didn't. The florist was kind until money entered the sentence. The photographer was offended on principle and practical about fees. The venue manager sent a cancellation schedule with bullet points and bolded numbers, merciless in a professional way. Eleanor argued on speakerphone, voice cracking, jaw clenched. He didn't intervene. She signed those contracts. Consequences were not cruelty, they were gravity. He moved 2 suitcases into a friend's apartment across town. The friend, Carter, didn't ask for the story and didn't offer advice. He dragged a set of spare sheets out of a plastic tub and said, "Pillowcases are in the top drawer. Take the firmer pillow. The soft one lies to you." That made him smile for the first time in days, a small, reluctant thing that felt like a muscle discovering it hadn't died. In the quiet of Carter's place, He slept unbroken for 4 hours, then 5, then an entire night. He woke with a start, heart ready for a fight that didn't exist in this room. He lay still and let the new quiet sit on his chest without crushing him. At work, he refused to be the man whose tragedy is a hobby for other people. When someone asked if everything was okay, he said yes and set a meeting for Tuesday. When someone pressed, he said he'd handle it and sent a file on time. Competence became the way he protected his mind from the cheap magnetism of gossip. Meanwhile, Grace moved like a tide, steady, unapologetic, unafraid to recede and return with more force. Word filtered back in the small, efficient ways communities share news. A colleague's cousin had seen Sebastian leaving a lawyer's office. An old friend heard that custody terms were being discussed. A neighbor mentioned that Grace's parents had taken turns with the baby so she could sleep. No one said the words, "She looks stronger," but people change their posture around someone whose spine has hardened. Doors hold open a little longer. Voices lower. Respect finds the person who earned it. Eleanor did not find that kind of grace. Her parents stopped arguing on her behalf when arguments bent under the weight of screenshots. A friend unfriended her with the casual brutality of modern mercy. Another sent a text that read, "I love you, but I can't defend this," and then did not answer the next 20 messages. Reputation is a spun thing. It frays quickly when pride is careless with scissors. 2 weeks after the confrontation, the fiancé agreed to meet Eleanor at a cafe to finalize what couldn't be done over email. He arrived on time. She was already there, holding a paper cup in both hands like it might warm her into a different person. She looked smaller, not thinner, but dimmer, as if the light inside her had realized it was expensive and refused to stay on without cause. She started talking before he sat. "I ruined it," she said. "I know I ruined it," I thought. And then the word thought failed her again. "He said he'd leave her if it came to it," she blurted. "He said he loved me." He let the sentence land and die. "He told the truth last night," he said, to Grace. That's the love he chose when someone asked for receipts. She squeezed her cup so hard the lid warped. "I can't believe you went to her." "I went to the truth," he said. "It led me to her." She stared at him with a look that was part ache, part anger, and part the dawning realization that she had never been an exception to a rule, only someone drifting along the edge of it, hoping no one noticed. "Do you ever miss me?" she asked, almost politely. "I miss the person I believed you were," he said. "But she doesn't exist." She closed her eyes. A long breath shuddered out. When she opened them again, they were red but steady. "Then this is it," she said. "This is it," he agreed. They went through the list, keys, the storage unit code, the final bill from the band. She signed the last page with a trembling flourish and pushed it toward him. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. I hope I'm not this person forever." "Then stop being her," he said. Not cruelly, not kindly, just as instruction. He stood. She stood too. They didn't hug. They didn't shake hands. He left the cafe feeling like he'd stepped from artificial light into winter sun, colder but cleaner. On the train back, his phone buzzed. A single message from Grace. "I told my sister everything today. She didn't pity me. She believed me. You gave me that. Thank you," he typed. "I'm glad." This time he sent it. The next twist didn't feel like a twist when it arrived. It felt like a warning he finally understood. Eleanor texted him late that night. "He says he's coming over. he blames you. His first response was to turn the phone face down, but experience had taught him that men who lose control of their story try to reclaim it with volume. He forwarded the text to Carter, dropped his location, and stayed awake. Just after midnight, the building buzzer snarled. Carter, already pulling on a hoodie, nodded once. "You want me to call someone?" "No," he said. "Let me try quiet first." They went downstairs together. Sebastian stood outside the glass door, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, eyes bright with the stubborn, ugly hope of a man who thinks a performance might change facts. He jerked when he saw the fiancé, then squared his shoulders and launched into another pre-written speech about hacking and ambush and bro code. "Stop," the fiancé said, voice flat. "You're scaring no one." Sebastian blinked. He hadn't rehearsed what to do if his lines failed to land. The fiancé held up his phone. "You're here because you think menace will improve your odds. It won't. You're not at risk of losing me. You've already lost your wife." The sentence hit with surgical accuracy. Sebastian's mouth twitched. For one clear second, something honest crossed his face. Not rage, not swagger, not an aimless brand of hurt, but regret, clean and specific. It vanished under a scowl, but it had existed. That was enough to tell the fiancé what he needed to know. There was nothing here he wanted to fight. He turned his back and walked to the elevator. Carter stayed where he was until the door closed, a large, silent witness whose presence said, "Don't." Sebastian didn't follow. Men who finally see themselves rarely chase mirrors. The last thread in this part of the story belongs to the kind of preparation people call cruel until they need it themselves. The fiancé opened a new document on his laptop, title, Transitions. He listed accounts, auto-pays, storage boxes, the reminder to remove her as emergency contact with HR, the dates for changing the lease, the utility switch. He scheduled calls with customer service lines. He wrote scripts for himself because scripts are what give people steadiness when their bodies want to shake. He didn't draft speeches about morality. He drafted steps. And that, more than anything, is how he kept himself from burning down the parts of his life that hadn't lied. He set a second reminder: reach out to a therapist, not because he felt broken, because he respected the architecture of his own mind enough to shore up beams after an earthquake. Quiet men gather what matters. He would gather help without waiting for collapse. Before he closed the laptop, he opened the folder he had named Evidence one last time. He hovered over the files, then moved them to an encrypted archive. He would keep them, not for revenge, not to stare at old wounds, but because truth, once handled, deserves a safe, unloud place to live. Across town, Grace dimmed a nursery lamp and hummed a melody without words to the baby, who would not remember this month, but would live in the shape of the choices made inside it. She looked at her daughter's face and felt a steadiness that surprised her. People talk about rage as fuel. Sometimes the calmer thing is stronger. She reached for her phone, typed a short message, and didn't send it. "You saved me 6 months I would have lost to doubt." She deleted it and smiled at the silence that had finally begun to feel like peace. Eleanor lay awake in a bedroom that had started to echo. She held her phone to her chest and tried to believe the next vibration would be the one that saved her from the version of herself she had built and then fallen through. It didn't come. She set the phone down, picked it up, set it down again, and learned the first lesson of consequence. Some nights are just nights. No one owes you a rescue. And the fiancé? He slept, the unshowy sleep of a man who had chosen his path and accepted the cost. Somewhere between midnight and morning, his jaw unclenched. Somewhere between morning and noon, he laughed at something small, a dumb video Carter shoved in his face. And the laugh didn't feel like theft from grief. It felt like something he had earned back. Quiet does not mean weak. It means prepared. It means patient. It means that when the door rattles, you know which bolts hold and which ones you're willing to replace. The door had rattled. The bolts had held. This was not the end. There were still papers to sign, accounts to close, and a future to choose deliberately rather than reactively. But a line had been crossed and then drawn again, cleaner, sharper, owned. In the next turn of this story, the fallout grows teeth. Family takes sides. Money speaks the language it always speaks, cold, exact, unsentimental. And the last illusions learn how quickly they evaporate under a ledger's light. But for now, the apartment is quiet, and quiet belongs to the people who made friends with it first. The days that followed were not loud explosions, but slow fractures. Betrayal doesn't always announce itself with sirens. It trickles, it seeps, it finds the cracks in walls people once thought were unbreakable. Eleanor tried, at first, to contain it. She told herself and anyone who would listen that it had been just texting. She rehearsed those words like they were an incantation that could undo what had already been burned into screenshots. But repetition doesn't turn smoke into air. Every call she made sounded thinner. Every explanation collapsed under the weight of her own voice. Her parents called again, this time both on the line. Their questions were blunt, their tone colder than she expected. "What were you thinking?" her father asked, not with anger, but with the exhausted disbelief of a man who has run out of ground to give. "I made a mistake," Eleanor whispered. You didn't stop," her mother interrupted. "That's the part you can't explain away." The fiancé, quiet, deliberate, stood by the window while she spoke, not intruding, not saving. He didn't need to. Truth was doing the work for him. That night, Eleanor turned to him, eyes red, asking a question she already knew the answer to. "You're really calling it off?" "Yes." His tone was calm, firm. A stone dropped into still water. "The wedding is over." She folded into herself, whispering things about second chances, about rebuilding, about how she could cut Sebastian out for good. But every word carried the echo of a woman bargaining with ashes. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't argue, he simply said, "Love without respect isn't love." And silence did the rest. Meanwhile, Grace moved with the precision of someone who has decided pain will not be wasted. She gathered her evidence, every timestamp, every message, and brought it to an attorney. The screenshots became legal exhibits. Sebastian tried to argue context, to frame it as nostalgia. But words lose their flexibility when they've already been frozen in print. Judges don't read emojis as jokes, they read them as intent. Within a week, Grace had filed for separation. She requested custody of their infant daughter and attached the compiled evidence. Her lawyer was almost impressed at the neatness of the package. Dates, times, replies, all telling the same unambiguous story. Sebastian raged, denied, wept, promised. None of it mattered. The truth had left his hands the moment his thumbs had tapped out midnight confessions. Back in the apartment, the consequences arrived with less drama but equal force. The vendors wanted answers. They didn't care about betrayal. They cared about contracts. deposits, deadlines. The florist's voice was kind until she mentioned money. The photographer was disappointed but professional. The venue coordinator emailed a schedule of cancellation fees, each bullet point a small knife. Eleanor spent hours on the phone, pleading, bargaining. Her voice cracked, her words tangled, but policy doesn't bend for heartbreak. The bills were hers. The fiancé didn't interfere. He had forwarded her contact information to each vendor, politely, firmly, ensuring responsibility landed where it belonged. When Eleanor slammed the phone down, muttering that he was cruel, he looked at her once and said, "I didn't write the contracts. You signed them." Her friends began to fade. At first, there were sympathetic messages. "Are you okay? Do you want to talk?" But as whispers spread, sympathy curdled into distance. Invitations disappeared. Group chats went quiet. A friend she had known for years sent a single text, "I love you, but I can't defend this." And then nothing more. Reputation is fragile. It doesn't shatter with one blow, it frays, and once the threads loosen, the whole fabric unravels. Eleanor, who once thrived on attention, found herself shrinking into rooms where no one wanted to hear her side anymore. The fiancé moved into Carter's apartment. Carter didn't ask questions. He simply pointed to the spare pillow and said, "Take the firmer one. The soft one lies to you." That night, on a couch that creaked with every turn, the fiancé slept better than he had in weeks. Not because he was free of pain, but because the walls around him no longer carried lies. He worked. He showed up on time. He finished projects. When colleagues noticed his tired eyes, he brushed it off. He refused to be the man whose private wreckage became office, entertainment. Competence was his armor. Grace, meanwhile, grew stronger. People noticed. They saw her walk into the grocery store with her daughter balanced on her hip and her chin unbowed. They opened doors for her without knowing why. Respect clung to her, uninvited but deserved. Sebastian did not receive the same grace. Word spread. It always does. Friends withdrew. Colleagues whispered. The man who had once performed charm in every room now found himself edged out of conversations. Infidelity is ugly enough. Infidelity while your wife is home with a newborn is unforgettable. 2 weeks later, the fiancé met Eleanor in a cafe to sign the last papers, divide the last details. She looked smaller, not physically, but in presence. The light she once carried so confidently now flickered, dim and desperate. She clutched her coffee cup with trembling hands, as though its warmth might hold her together. "I ruined it," she said before he even sat down. Her voice was flat, resigned. "I thought Sebastian would leave her." "He told me he would. He told the truth last night," the fiancé said evenly. "To his wife. That's who he chose when she asked him for proof." Her lips pressed into a line. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Not yet. "Do you ever miss me?" "I miss the woman I believed you were," he said. "But she doesn't exist." The sentence landed like a gavel, final. They went through the checklist, the keys, the storage unit, the last invoice from the band. When she signed the final document, her hand trembled so hard the ink wavered. "I don't expect forgiveness," she whispered, "but I hope I'm not this person forever." "Then stop being her," he said. Not cruel, not tender, just true. They stood, no hug, no handshake. Two strangers walking away from the ashes of a wedding that would never be. On the train back, his phone buzzed. Grace's message was brief. "I told my sister everything today. She didn't pity me. She believed me. You gave me that. Thank you. This time he typed "I'm glad" and sent it. But the storm hadn't finished yet. That night, Eleanor texted, "He says he's coming over. He blames you." He stared at the message, then showed Carter. Carter raised his brows, already reaching for his phone. "You want me to call someone?" "No," he said. "Let me try quiet first." Minutes later, the buzzer snarled. Sebastian stood outside the glass door, eyes bright with the ugly energy of a man who thought performance could erase fact. He launched into accusations, half scripted, half desperate. "You set me up. You hacked her phone. You ruined 2 relationships for no reason." "Stop," the fiancé said, voice calm, steady. "You're scaring no one." Sebastian faltered. The script slipped. "You're here because you think menace will change the truth," the fiancé continued. "It won't. You're not at risk of losing me. You've already lost your wife." The words hit. For a moment, regret cracked through Sebastian's anger, clean and undeniable. Then he swallowed it, muttered, and backed away. Men who finally see themselves rarely chase mirrors. Back upstairs, the fiancé opened his laptop. He created a file titled Transitions. Inside, he listed accounts to change, keys to return, contacts to update. He scheduled a therapy appointment, not because he felt broken, but because he respected himself enough to repair before collapse. He encrypted the evidence folder, storing it not as a wound, but as history. Across town, Grace dimmed the nursery light and rocked her daughter, humming softly. She typed a message she never sent. "You saved me 6 months I would have lost to doubt." Then she deleted it and smiled at the silence that now felt like strength. Eleanor lay awake in her parents' house, clutching her phone, waiting for a message that would never come. And the fiancé? He slept, deeply, quietly, as though the storm had passed, even though he knew more waves were coming. Because the next phase would not be about whispers in the dark. It would be about family reckonings, financial ruins, and the last illusions crumbling under the weight of reality. The next act of the story did not take place in the apartment, nor in a cafe, nor even in the hushed dark of a midnight confrontation. It unfolded in daylight under the scrutiny of families, people who had invested pride, money, and their reputations into futures they thought were secure. When betrayal spreads, it doesn't only break 2 hearts, it bleeds outward. The fiancé, calm, deliberate, made good on his promise. He informed Eleanor's parents directly. He didn't use sharp words, he didn't dramatize. He simply forwarded them the same evidence he had sent Grace. Her father called first. His silence over the phone line felt heavier than any accusation. Finally he spoke, voice taut. "I don't know what to say." "There's nothing to say," the fiancé replied. "You'll see for yourself." When her mother called hours later, she wasn't angry in the way Eleanor expected. She was cold. "You embarrassed us," she said. "We introduced him to friends. We made plans, and you," her voice broke, "you betrayed all of it for a man who wasn't even free." Eleanor tried to protest, tried to insist it hadn't been physical, that it was just late-night texts, but her mother cut her short. "Your fiancé sent us proof. Grace has a newborn. How could you?" That question, "How could you?" followed Eleanor everywhere. The financial fallout was merciless. The wedding had been set for spring, and deposits had been paid months ago. Caterers, photographers, florists, they all wanted their share. The fiancé, organized and methodical, had ensured his name was only on a few contracts. Most bore hers. The calls came daily. One vendor threatened legal action. Another demanded partial payment within the week. Eleanor begged her parents for help, but her father refused flatly. "If you were grown enough to do what you did," he said, "you're grown enough to handle the consequences." The weight of bills stacked on her shoulders like bricks. Each invoice was a reminder, not just of money lost, but of promises broken. Meanwhile, the fiancé's world grew strangely lighter. His name was clean, his reputation intact. When friends asked, he gave short, careful answers. He didn't spread the story himself. He didn't need to. The story carried itself. Sebastian's collapse was sharper. Grace filed her petition for separation and custody with surgical precision. She attached the evidence, every line of intimacy recorded in black and white. Judges don't parse feelings, they parse facts, and the facts were devastating. He tried to fight, to argue context, but context doesn't survive timestamps. He tried to lean on friends, but friends slipped away quietly, unwilling to tie their own reputations to a man who had left his wife and infant for midnight whispers with an ex. Even his family turned cold. His mother, once fiercely protective, told him plainly, "You chose this. Don't drag us into it." Grace, on the other hand, grew steadier. She leaned on her parents, on her sister, on quiet reserves of strength she hadn't known she carried. Her texts to the fiancé grew fewer, shorter, not because she was angry, but because she didn't need his reassurance anymore. She was finding her own. The fiancé's silence became its own weapon. Eleanor wanted anger. She wanted shouting, accusations, an argument she could twist into a defense. Instead, she received calm withdrawal. He canceled vendor contracts, forwarded her the bills, and left her to answer. When she tried to bait him into emotional sparring, he simply said, "We're done," and walked away. She screamed once that he was cold, inhuman. He replied softly, "No, I'm just finished." 3 weeks after the confrontation, Eleanor hit her lowest point. She confessed to him, through tears, that she had believed Sebastian would leave Grace, that when the truth came out, he would choose her. Instead, he had begged Grace to stay, and had thrown Eleanor to the wolves, framing her as the reckless one. "He promised me," she sobbed. "He promised Grace too," the fiancé said. "Look how much that promise was worth." Her breakdown was almost harder to watch than her betrayal had been. Almost, but not quite. Because beneath her tears was still the arrogance that had made her believe she could build a future on someone else's marriage. The fiancé knew one final act remained: closure. He couldn't just disappear. There had to be a clear, definitive severing. He began with the wedding vendors. He drafted a message, calm and professional, explaining that the wedding was canceled. He copied Eleanor on every email. Within hours, her phone flooded with calls demanding explanations, refunds, or payments. Her screams of frustration filled the apartment, but he ignored them. Then he packed. A single bag at first, then boxes. He told her plainly, "I'm moving out. You can stay here until the lease ends. But you'll be handling everything else." She begged. She clung to his arm, promised to change, to cut Sebastian out completely. But her promises sounded like lines rehearsed too late in a play that had already closed. He walked out, the door clicking softly behind him, and felt only relief. His friend Carter welcomed him again, no questions asked. Nights on the couch turned into something steadier. He started sleeping longer, deeper. He started eating without nausea twisting his stomach. He started smiling, just a little, at small things. Meanwhile, Eleanor spiraled. Her parents kept their distance, friends pulled away, vendors pressed harder. She took extra shifts at work just to keep up. But social exile hit her harder than bills. She had built her identity on admiration, on being seen. Now every whisper in every circle was about her betrayal. She was no longer Eleanor, the bride-to-be. She was Eleanor, the unfaithful fiancée, and that name clung to her like smoke. 2 months later, the fiancé agreed to meet her one final time. A cafe again. She looked diminished, her presence dimmed, her hair unkempt, her eyes hollow. She started speaking the moment he sat down. "I ruined everything," she said. "Sebastian dropped me right after Grace left him. He begged her to stay. He cut me off. I thought he'd choose me. He didn't." She stared at him, desperate. "Do you hate me?" "No," he said. "Hate requires energy. And you drained all of mine long ago." She broke then, not loud, not theatrical, just quiet tears sliding down her cheeks, dripping into her coffee. She wanted him to offer something, comfort, forgiveness, even pity. He offered nothing. When he left, she stayed behind, staring at nothing, a woman undone by her own choices. The fiancé's life grew quieter, steadier. He threw himself into work, into rebuilding the routines that betrayal had once poisoned. He found himself laughing again at Carter's jokes. He went entire days without thinking of Eleanor or Sebastian. Grace, too, found strength in the ashes. She pursued her separation with resolve. She gained custody of her daughter. She began building a new life defined not by betrayal, but by freedom. Sebastian drifted downward, alone in a small apartment, visiting his daughter only under supervision, his reputation shredded. Eleanor stayed with her parents, her relationship with them strained, her debts heavy, her social life gone. The fiancé? He breathed easier, because sometimes revenge isn't about shouting or violence. It's about truth. And when truth walks into a room, it rearranges everything. By the time months had passed, the story no longer felt like a fresh wound. It was a scar, tender at times, but firm in its reminder. Scars don't let you forget, but they teach you to live without reopening. The fiancé, no longer a fiancé, just a man rebuilding, sat in a quiet bar one Friday evening. The air smelled faintly of citrus and whiskey, the kind of scent that belongs to endings and beginnings alike. His phone buzzed once, a new message. It was from Grace, 2 words, "Thank you," that was all. No elaborate explanation, no plea for conversation, just gratitude. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then set the phone down. That was enough. Because sometimes closure doesn't arrive with dramatic gestures. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet acknowledgement that the truth you set free helped someone else build a better life. Eleanor's life, meanwhile, had become a series of collapses that didn't stop at heartbreak. She had moved back into her parents' home temporarily, though home was a fragile word now. Their conversations were clipped, their patience thin. She worked extra shifts to pay off debts from the wedding vendors. She avoided social gatherings where whispers would follow her like shadows. Friends had not returned. Invitations had not reappeared. She scrolled through her phone late at night, watching the silence pile up, knowing that forgiveness, if it ever came, would not erase the stain. She had gambled her future on a man who had abandoned her the moment consequences appeared, and that, in itself, was punishment enough. Sebastian's downfall was harsher. Grace had gone through with the separation. She gained primary custody. His visits with his daughter were supervised, his reputation gutted. The man who once strutted into rooms now slipped into them, hoping not to be noticed. His colleagues spoke of him in whispers. His friends kept their distance. He lived alone in a small apartment, temporary in design but permanent in reality. The kind of place that smelled faintly of regret and reheated food. He had lost not only his wife and child, but the version of himself that once seemed enviable. Now, when people thought of him, they didn't think of charm or confidence. They thought of betrayal, cowardice, and collapse. Grace thrived, not without scars, not without pain, but with resilience. She focused on her daughter, on rebuilding a future free from deceit. She found strength in the knowledge that she hadn't been crazy, that her instincts had been right, and that truth had arrived when she needed it most. Her texts to the man who had exposed the affair grew fewer over time until they stopped altogether, not from distance, but from healing. She no longer needed proof or reminders or support. She had built her own stability, and that was the greatest sign of all. One final time, Eleanor reached out. She asked him to meet her for closure. Curiosity, not hope, led him to say yes. At the cafe, she looked smaller than before, not thinner, but dimmer. The light she had once carried so proudly had been extinguished. Her hair was unkempt. Her hands shook around her paper cup. "I made a mistake," she said quickly. "I didn't realize what I was risking. I thought Sebastian would be different." He listened, but he did not soften. "He begged Grace to forgive him," she admitted. "He dropped me the moment she left. I lost everything for nothing." She looked at him, eyes glassy. "Do you hate me?" "No," he said gently. "Hate requires energy." "You drained mine long ago." She flinched. A tear slipped down her cheek. She asked quietly, "Could we ever rebuild?" He shook his head. "Love without respect isn't love, and there's nothing left to rebuild." She wept softly, not dramatically, just the sound of someone realizing there are no more excuses, no more chances. He left her there, lingering at the table, staring at nothing. That was the last time he saw her. Months later, his life was calm again. Work was steady. His nights were quiet. He laughed again, sometimes without noticing. He no longer thought of betrayal daily. When it did cross his mind, it felt like a scar, visible, undeniable, but no longer bleeding. In that quiet bar, when Grace's thank you lit up his screen, he realized something important. He had not gone looking for revenge. He had only wanted clarity, proof, the truth. But once truth is set free, it burns away illusions. It forces change. And though destruction had followed, so had release. He lifted his glass, sipped slowly, and felt lighter. Not triumphant, not gloating, just calm. Because in the end, betrayal had written its own punishment. Eleanor had lost her future. Sebastian had lost his family. And Grace had built strength from the ruins. He had simply chosen not to burn with them. And here, dear listeners, is the lesson I hope you carry with you tonight. When trust is broken, you cannot rebuild it with excuses. Love without respect is not love at all, and silence, patience, and truth are sometimes stronger than any storm. This was Emily, your narrator for Scars and Stories. If this story resonated with you, subscribe, share, and join me again. Because every scar tells a story, and every story reminds us that survival is possible, even after betrayal.